Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
And welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today I am joined by a fellow podcast host. She is the host of The Story Behind podcast. And not only does she have a podcast, but she turned it into a book, which you can get on Amazon or maybe someplace else, maybe a bookstore. That would be really cool too. And I am joined by Emily Prokop of The Story Behind podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Hi, thanks for having me, David.
I am glad to have you. We just finished having our little off-air talk to begin with. Yeah, you have been doing podcasting, I think, right about as long as I have. You're heading towards your 3-year mark too, right?
I got to 3 years in the summer, and it's funny because my show is only about 2.5 years old, but I had a show before The Story Behind that I did for a year, and that was kind of my sandbox where I learned to podcast with, and I made all the mistakes with that show.
Oh, okay. I think I was going off of your story, the Story
yeah.
Behind podcast. I was like, okay, that's coming up on 3 years. And I was like, oh yeah, we started right about the same time. But nope, you got the extra year.
Yeah, I got to make a lot of mistakes and then kind of start over again.
Oh gosh, the mistakes. There are the many mistakes of podcasting.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because I'm, and we'll talk about the podcast later. How long did it take to edit your first episode?
My 40-minute episode took 8 hours to edit.
Yeah, I'm nodding here. No one can see me nodding,
Yeah.
but I'm nodding here. I think my first episode was an hour long, and it took right about 6 to 7 hours. And not a problem. I'm still trying to figure things out, and I've got it pretty well handled now, except that I can't leave my recordings just up on the computer because my computer likes to just restart randomly now, like in the evening.
Oh, no.
It's like, oh, I need an update.
Oh,
I come back,
gosh.
it's like, what have you done? I can't leave my editing midstream. I have to finish the edit before I go to sleep now.
Yeah. I'm so afraid of technology losing my episodes all the time. I'm constantly saving because that happened once. Once it happens to you, and this was with my first podcast, once it happens when you lose an episode, you're just like, that's it. My hand is trained for Control S all the time. Even though I'm using a different software that auto saves, I still find myself pressing Control S just in case.
I use before we're getting into like podcasty talk, which always happens with podcasters. I used a different website to record my episodes at one point, and I swear to gosh, I opened the episode up to edit it, and it had it was a full file. Don't get me wrong, it's like this file is 50 meg or whatever it was, and it was nothing. It was silence for a whole hour.
That's the
It didn't,
fear.
and it's like, what? Like, what? I saw waveforms when we were talking. I see that it's recording, but nothing. And of course, then you get like the robot voices or audio drift, and you're like, curse you. Like I said before, you've been on my list. You are an amazing person in the podcasting community for all the stuff that you do. And we'll be getting to that later too. However, there was a comment or a post that you made either on Facebook or Twitter, and it caught me off guard. And I really want to talk about it because you were formerly a part of the WWE.
Yeah. I was a fact checker at the now closed WWE Magazine.
That is incredible. How did okay? Are you like a fan of professional wrestling?
I'm afraid to answer that because I wasn't. and I didn't realize until I got there or until I was talking to people that my job was just coveted by people. And actually, when they brought me in to interview, they said, it's kind of a good thing that you're not a fan because we don't necessarily want fans working for us because they want to keep their superstars. We weren't allowed to call them wrestlers. We had to call them superstars. We don't want our superstars to feel intimidated or feel like they come to the corporate office and they're mobbed by fans. So it was kind of a good thing for me to go into that interview and being like, I'm a fast learner. I'll learn the stuff from WWE that you need me to know. But aside from watching it with my dad when I was really young, back in the Hulk Hogan days and Jake the Snake era, like I really don't know what was going on. And when I started, this was 2007 that I started, I came in my first week. Actually, my first day, I came in and the whole Chris Benoit thing had just gone down. I had
Oh my gosh.
I had no idea who Chris Benoit was. But as a fact checker, we had just sent an issue to press, and what we had to do was pull the issue back, which cost a lot of money. And I had to go through and look for any reference to Chris Benoit and also any photo. And I didn't even know what he looked like. And then when I saw a picture of him, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just a generic white guy. Like, how am I supposed to find this guy? And luckily, that was a hell of a first week. And it kind of set the tone for the rest of my 3 years there was, you're going to have to learn this stuff super quick. You hit the ground running when you work there. So it was an awesome experience. It taught me a lot. It was a lot of learning really quickly. And I'm kind of happy I was in my 20s, because in your 20s, you're a lot more resilient and you can have stuff thrown at you. And yes, it's stressful. But I mean, if it happened to me now, I'd be like, nope, bye.
When you were applying for the job, I assume you knew it was it out there like, hey, you're applying for WWF, or was it more like I'm applying for like a fact checker position with a magazine?
Well, I had friends from the newspaper that we used to work in. We worked in Stamford, Connecticut, and I had two friends from that newspaper who had gone to WWE because the opportunities were really great. And if anybody knows newspapers and journalism, the money isn't fantastic and the opportunities kind of go down. So the fact that this was a corporate job and they were looking for journalism experience or writing experience, it ended up working out really well. And one of my friends who also worked at the magazine, who came from the newspaper, had said, hey, this position's open. This is a good position, good starting position for you to come into, and it will get you out of the newspaper business. Like, I've had so many people try to get me out of the newspaper business because it's dying. My husband still works in the newspapers, and now I'm the one being like, you got to get out of there. But his job is pretty secure, so that's good.
Yeah, that was my original like degree / goal, was newspaper and journalism, and I wanted to be like a photographer / writer. And my best friend he actually just left the newspaper business probably a year or two ago and went into news journalism on TV.
Nice.
But yeah, that's been the refrain for like years and years. Newspapers are dying. Get out now.
And it's funny, they're not actually dying. They are just learning how to still produce a paper on such a limited budget by getting rid of as many people as they can and giving all the work to somebody else. Like my husband, who's now, he can't get fired because he does the work of about 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, that doesn't come with pay raises very often.
No, it does not.
No.
Not even close. So you came in. I mean, and I have to give much love because you mentioned Jake the Snake Roberts, and he was one of my favorite wrestlers back in the 80s. But you got into the in 2007, that would have been like really I mean, is past like the Attitude Era, but you're getting into
Right.
like the quote unquote like ruthless aggression era, I believe is the term that they use.
Yeah, well, we kind of had to stay away from that after Benoit. It was funny because we had a style book, and a style book, for anyone who doesn't know, is this is how things are spelled out. These are the things that we can refer to. These are things we don't refer to. One of the things I'll never forget from the style book, if anybody ever writes out Ric Flair's woo, it has 4 O's and 1 exclamation point. Just so you know, that is the official style of WWE.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had this style book. And once the Benoit thing happened, all of a sudden, my friend who was in charge of putting together the style book, he was a copy editor. He was like, and now I have to revamp the whole style book. So don't bother learning it, because now we can't use the word choke anymore. We had to, WWE had to change a lot of the signature moves of people to take out choke and choke slam. They had to rename it something else or refer to it differently. And the other thing that happened at the time that I was starting, they were just starting to get into a little bit more family friendly with John Cena.
Yep.
John Cena was our golden boy. The kids loved him. And that was one thing about going to the live events was, you're kind of stuck there in an office and you're just like, oh my gosh, if I have to spell check Rey Mysterio's name one more time to make sure a writer didn't spell it R-A-Y, I am going to lose my crap. I don't know if I can swear on this. I'm going to lose my crap. And, but then when you go to a live event and you see all the kids, like John Cena will come out and the kids start crying. It's like when you see those videos of girls and teenagers when the Beatles got off the plane. It's like, that's those kids with John Cena. And it was so beautiful and heartfelt. Like, it was lovely to watch just how much people love WWE. So it's very tough for me to come on and say, yeah, I worked at WWE and I'm not necessarily a fan, because I know how passionate people are about it. And that was part of my job as a fact checker, was having to go through and not only checking spellings, but also checking things that writers would throw in. So I made a joke once, and this is a real testimony to how much in love with WWE these fans are. I made a joke once on Twitter about being a fact checker and saying, yeah, you know, if I said that Triple H 15 years ago wore red trunks in a dark match, somebody would come along who knows those dark matches that aren't shown on TV. They know them so well, and they would actually write to the magazine and say, actually, he wore maroon pants. And then the funny thing was, I used that as an example, just kind of throwing it out there, and all of a sudden somebody replied, actually, Triple H was 15 years ago. And I was like, oh my God, it was an example. See, this is why I fact check. And he's like, well, I don't know what kind of dark matches he would be in 15 years ago, because he was And I'm like, it was just an example. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Oh my goodness. That is the thing that I've discovered. Okay, so I've been doing the podcast almost 3 years now, and I've gotten to the point where, and it came up this weekend because Endgame, and I was talking with my brother-in-law. I can't talk with people about stuff anymore. I just it's like too opinionated, or I don't want to know. Just let me enjoy my thing, and I don't really let me enjoy my thing. You enjoy your thing. We'll talk a little bit, but I don't want to go into the intricacies of what you really want to get into, or tell me oh, well, in this and this. No, I can't do that anymore. I'm not 20. I can't.
It's so funny how I don't know if it's more passion we had in our 20s, or it's something like maybe in our 30s and 40s that we get to the point where we're just like, oh my gosh, there's so many things in the world. I cannot focus on one thing long enough to actually be a super fan of it anymore.
Oh my, that is absolutely the truth, because and I feel like it's slowly devolved for me, because I used to be Star Wars and Star Trek and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, so fully invested in just those particular things. And now it's yeah, I watch a few shows, and yeah, I'll go watch it in the movie theater, but I'm not pounding the keyboard. I'm not in fan groups. I'm not knocking down people's doors or anything. I'm just yeah, I enjoyed it. It's cool. And if I get to talk about it, it's cool. But I'm not going to be well, let me tell you what didn't work and what they need to do or needed to. I don't do that anymore. I just enjoy it. Thanks.
I know. And I think also because we have kids, we end up having to take on their fandoms a little bit. It's ridiculous the amount of knowledge I have about My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. It's ridiculous. I should not have as much knowledge as I do.
I will say that I was kind of against My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, because I grew up on the original My Little Pony.
Right.
So I'm what are I don't know any of these ponies. Who are they? Get off my screen. But my daughter was really she still watches it. She's going on 10 now, and she still watches it. And I've sat through probably all the episodes. Some are better than others, but they have Weird Al is on the episode, and there's all they really get into some stuff where it's I really dig this.
And they definitely make it in a way, I really appreciate this about a lot of the kids media that they watch. They make it in a way that appeals to the adults watching it. There are jokes on My Little Pony where it's wait, that's a John Hughes movie from the 80s that they're referring to. Yeah, I'm so into this. That's right, Rainbow Dash.
Absolutely, it is absolutely the case. I am glad, and I'm pretty sure the people that are doing the writing and stuff now are the people, they're our generation, so to speak. They are writing because they understand what their parents probably went through watching stuff with them. Like, I know
Yes.
my parents would never have wanted to sit down and watch some of these movies or TV shows with me, but now, we watch and it's like, well, those jokes are for the kids and those jokes are for the adults because they understand that we have to watch it too.
And I like that the jokes are subtle enough where the kids are still kind of laughing. Like the joke I'm
Mhm.
referring to, I'm pretty sure they made a reference to the Breakfast Club, and Rainbow Dash said something like, "Can you describe the ruckus, sir?" And I'm sitting there laughing because I know the Breakfast Club inside and out. And meanwhile, my daughter's laughing, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait for about 6 years from now when I can show you the Breakfast Club, because that movie, it's very problematic now, but it's still part of my childhood. So you got to watch it.
Oh my goodness. We were watching some show that my wife used to watch when she was a kid, and we are watching it with our kids because it's like, oh, haha, funny. Like this person built a robot girl, and now they kind of like adopted her as a kid. And I'm swear I forget the name
Wait,
of it.
oh, is it Small Wonder?
Small Wonder, yes.
I love that show.
And we watched it back on YouTube because that's the only place we could find
Right.
it. That show is so incredibly problematic nowadays, like way problematic. Even like there's one episode where my wife and I were like, like actually cringing at just some of the things that were being said or done on the stream. We're like, no one would ever
Yeah.
do that.
I mean, if you put the premise out nowadays, okay, a a middle-aged guy builds this child robot to live in his house. It's like if you put that out there, that's something for Dateline. That's not a family-friendly sitcom.
Excuse me, do you know why I'm here at this dining room table talking to you? Did you know that you built a underage robot girl doll?
Even though this is not illegal, this is terribly disturbing.
Oh my goodness. Back to WWE real quick
Yeah.
before we transition,
Yeah.
because I love going on tangents and it's so great. When you were there, what was I guess I don't want to say weirdest, but what's the fact check that stands out to you the most when you're like thinking back on your time? What's that one thing that you're always remembering about that?
Well, this is actually perfect for this podcast. We had an article, and I had to check every single thing. And the magazine itself wasn't all about the WWE. They considered it a men's health magazine. So we talked about food, we talked about exercise, we would talk about maybe some current events here and there. But we had some reference to hobbits, and it was like a throwaway joke reference of just like, and a hobbit stands at about 4'8" or whatever. I fact checked that, even though it was throwaway. I just needed a source to be able to say, fine, that is the height of a hobbit. And of course, I don't remember now, so please don't send David or me letters about this. So I'm just throwing out 4'8". But I did find a source that said that hobbits were 4'8", and that was all I needed to do. After the issue came out, few weeks later, I got called into the office, and it was the publisher who had a very good relationship. It wasn't very much like, oh, the publisher is this big guy. It's like, no, he isn't an everyday, awesome guy in the office. And I walk in, and he's like, Emily, I just got the weirdest email. All I need to know is that you have a source to back this up. How tall is a hobbit? And I was like, I knew that would come back. I knew that thing would come back, because the letter was just like, actually, in this version, the hobbit's da-da-da-da-da. But in this version, when you look at the context around what they're talking about, a hobbit walking through this door, which would be this high. And I'm just like, this is a very, very well thought out email. But here's the source that I used. And my publisher was like, I understand. This is a very awkward email that I have to write back to this guy who put so much time into writing about the height of a hobbit, to a magazine. But I mean, that was a really cool thing, was that we acknowledged all those letters, and that I would get in trouble for people writing letters, because we wanted to make sure that our magazine was like a business card that we could give to people and have everything be as factually accurate as possible. I remember one time also, this old scratch logos, if everyone remembers when WWE used to be WWF, and there was that whole kerfluffle with the World Wildlife Federation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we could use the block logo, which is the more stocky looking WWF, and that was fine to use in historic pictures, but we couldn't use the one that looks more similar to today, where it's kind of scratchy, and it's called the scratch logo, but it would have the W and then the F made out of that last leg of the W, and it was called the scratch logo. We could not use that. If we use that, the World Wildlife Federation could sue the company for that. And there was an instance where every time it would, go through a few rounds of people looking at it, if you caught a scratch logo in the third time around, it was like, everybody meeting. How did we not catch this sooner? I mean, this was kind of like our own little inside. We need to catch these. Like, this is going to be a huge lawsuit that we would be facing if that went through. And it was the only time that Shane McMahon, who also worked in our office, he was kind of in charge of the magazine, and he worked in that office, and he's just the friendliest guy, but that was the only time that I ever saw him get really mad. And now before that with Shane, whenever he played the heel on WWE, I'd be like, but I know him in real life. Like, he's a nice guy. He's like the nicest guy you could ever meet in the world. So when he played a heel, I was just like, I don't buy it. No, that meeting, I saw heel Shane McMahon, and I was like, oh my gosh, jeez, no.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I mean, not awesome like, getting yelled at, but,
Well, it was scary. It was real. It wasn't scary like I work here. It was scary as in, all right, I see how big of a deal this is. Okay, I'm going to really look for scratch logos now.
When you worked there, was it where you'd like see like the wrestlers or like the people that you see on the screen, essentially like refs or whatever? Would they be randomly just there, or okay?
Yeah, that was a really cool thing. We worked on the same floor as the gym. So if you went to the gym after hours, and you could go on your lunch break or whatever, because there was a gym right there. And a lot of the times, Tommy Dreamer was there. And my husband at the time, he was so embarrassed. Because you could take guests with you if you worked there, and we went to the gym together. And one time he was on the treadmill, and the night before he had, it was something like chicken parmesan. But while he was sweating, he could smell the garlic. I was across the room on something else, and I could smell the garlic. All of a sudden, Tommy Dreamer comes in, gets on the treadmill next to my husband at the time, and he's just like sniffing. I'm like, no. Another time, I was in an elevator with Triple H. And so here's the weird thing about working there. You never knew what to call Triple H, because it's like, okay, we have a working relationship. Do I call him Hunter? Do I call him Mr. H? We really didn't know what to call. Like, do I refer to him as his real name? So I was in an elevator with him. Luckily, I didn't have to refer to him by anything. But he dropped his phone, and it was when iPhones were kind of new. But when I picked it up, he had a picture of his two kids on there. And I looked at it before handing it to him, and I said, "Oh, they're so sweet." And Triple H blushed. Yeah, that's just my favorite. And he's like, "Oh, thank you." Like, he's a little softy. I mean, maybe there's an NDA of Emily, don't say this stuff, but Triple H is a little softy.
Last question, just because I'm curious.
Yeah.
You did the magazine for 3 years. Did you get into the product at all? Did you like develop like, okay, this is going to be my favorite wrestler? Or superstar? You
kind of have to have a little bit of a fan thing going on once you're working there, because you're talking about it constantly. Every Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, we would watch the shows that had previously been taped, and you'd end up watching the pay-per-views, and it was kind of a fun atmosphere. It was a really fun atmosphere to be in. So I did have favorite wrestlers. I tried to stay away from the people that we featured the most. So John Cena, very nice, very odd. Like, he's very much like he is on screen. When you see him on screen, he's very much that goofy, kind of fun-loving guy. But my favorites were actually the tag teamers, London and Kendrick.
Okay.
I loved them so much. They were so much fun. The day they came into the office, my coworkers, they all knew that I especially loved Brian Kendrick. I thought Brian Kendrick was just gorgeous. And so when Brian Kendrick came into the office, they were just like, Emily, he's here. Like they couldn't wait for me to get in so that I could meet Brian Kendrick and get a picture of me. And I have this such an awkward picture of me with London and Kendrick, and they're smiling like they normally do. And this was the only time I kind of fanned out. And this is what WWE did not want to hire me for. But I was just like, oh my gosh. And this picture of me, my smile is like across my face. I'm cringing. It's so scary. I'm just like, oh my God. Another one I can think of is John Morrison.
Okay.
When he came in, oh my God, first of all, he smells amazing. And it's almost like he has this personal fan blowing on his hair to get it feathery and nice. Like, it was just amazing to watch this Adonis in real life of just, oh my gosh, you're breathtaking.
Oh my goodness. I enjoyed regarding John Morrison. I enjoyed him because he was on Survivor last year.
Oh,
And
really?
it was a real treat to see him like just be who he is, like like not a character, but just
Yeah.
be him on a place trying to survive. And he's like, normally I eat like 6,000 calories a day, and now I'm down to like a couple hundred, if that. But is really cool, like the bonds that he formed with like people that you'd be like, I'd never see that. And sure enough, like he had like these really cool individual friendships with people. Is nice to see.
I have to say, all of the superstars that I met were so nice and friendly. I never had a bad interaction with any of them. The only one, I wouldn't say this is a bad interaction, but The Miz is exactly like he is. Like, exact. I mean, he sat down with one of the magazine writers when he met him, and he was like, all right, here, I'm going to show you how to hit on a girl at a bar. And the writer's just like, I didn't ask for this, but okay. Like, this is happening.
I remember watching him on The Real World.
Exactly. He's exactly like that. Either that or he has just morphed his personality into that reality show, WWE wrestling. He's so good at it too.
Mhm. Oh my goodness, man! This has been a blast of WWE past.
I know. Well, it's sad because I feel bad that this is like 2007 to 2009 era. So a lot of these people are gone. I remember one thing. So if anyone's wondering about the magazine, at least how it used to run. So we would put together an issue probably about at least 3 or 4 months before it was supposed to go live. And there was a problem with Kofi Kingston. He had come onto the scene while I was there. And originally he was billed as the Jamaican superstar. And we were going nuts with all the headlines of, if we use Jamaican Me Crazy, we use that all the time for him. And then we had put out a whole issue. He was kind of the centerfold of that issue. We talked about Jamaica a lot. And then all of a sudden, Monday Night Raw comes on when those pages had already gone to press. And he said something like, all right, I am no longer from Jamaica, by the way. Like, I want to be billed from my original country. And I had to be the one to go into the publisher's office and be like, we have to pull back all those pages because Creative didn't tell us anything. They were very secretive about what was going on. And unfortunately for us, we kind of had to watch the shows. That's why we had to watch the shows, was because we go with that storyline of what's going on. And we didn't get the notice from upstairs. And that was the other thing. I had to check with upstairs to make sure it's okay that we're pulling this back. And I'm just like, why is this not more open? But they are really secretive, even in their own company. But they are very secretive about what's going on, what's changing. And I think that's a good thing because it kind of kept us on our toes a lot. But it made my job as a fact checker really hard.
Oh, especially something like that. Like that. I mean, now, Kofi Kingston's like the actual world champion and super awesome. But yeah, like just a huge character shift like that. And I always thought the magazine was like not you worked on the magazine for, let's say, a September issue, but you're done with it, July, give or take.
Yeah.
Like you're working on it so far ahead that by the time it comes out, like most of the stuff in it isn't, I guess, equal to the actual TV show, give or take.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. See, yeah, I knew something. Hooray.
No, but magazines are funny because there's so much that goes into them that by the time they're in print and out, it's like they're already a few months ahead for the next one. So when people would
Hmm.
write letters and they'd be like, "Where did you get this fact?" A lot of like I learned quickly on I needed to write every source down. I had to make sure I had my links in order and just so that I could go back and say, "Okay, well, in this issue on page 56, here's the link and the links where the research is from." Because those letters, I mean, sometimes I'm kind of glad that I didn't have to read all of them. But the ones I did have to read were just like, "You are how dare you mess this up?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry."
Oh my goodness. So you worked for the WWE. That's super awesome. But and I've had a number of people we've talked professional wrestling because that's a really big thing that people love and I enjoy it. I don't watch it anymore. My wife doesn't watch, like my wife's not interested in it at all, and it's not something where I can sit down for like 6 or 7 hours a week and be like, okay, I'm dedicating time to this when I have other stuff to watch.
And what's funny was I always got into the storylines more than the wrestling itself. Like the match would go on and I just tune out completely. But then the promos would come on, or at that point we were starting to do web shows, and Santino had his own web show, and it was the most hilarious thing in the whole world. If anybody could go back and find, I think it was Santino's Cafe. So funny, so hilarious.
Oh man, what a day to be alive. But on top of WWE, there's something else that we talked about that you're into, and it's limited scope, which I'm totally cool with because it gets tricky outside of what it's been published. And so we're going to talk Harry Potter, but strictly books and movies, not anything else beyond that, because it can get dicey once we go out of canon, so to speak.
I know, and I can't keep up. J.K. Rowling keeps adding to this world that I've already built in my head and compartmentalized, and then she'll add something in years later, and I'm like, no, J.K., I can't do that right now.
Well, I always like to ask for people when we talk about Harry Potter. The first obvious question is, which house are you?
I'm a Ravenclaw.
Not shocked.
I know, because I'm very nerdy, I'm very booky, and I feel like Ravenclaws, it's like that house embrace introverts. even in the last movie when they're looking for Ravenclaw's diadem, and she's just like, "Oh, I don't want to get." I'm like, I get it, Rowena. I'm with you right there. Like, you don't want to show up. I don't want to show up either.
Oh yeah, like when I first read the books and I was in college at the time, I totally identified Ravenclaw. But after college, it transitioned, and I am a proud Hufflepuff.
You are. You know, if you ever change your profile picture, I will be so lost. I'll have no idea who you are, because all the time I just know you as like, David, he's a Hufflepuff, because it
David,
says
he's a
so.
Hufflepuff. That's right. I only had like 3 profile pictures probably in the past 8 years of however long I've been on Facebook. One is David is a Hufflepuff. The other one is David was standing with Chewbacca and Wicket from Disney
Oh,
Studios. And then the other one was probably like me and my oldest son when he was a baby, and is like this really cute picture, but that didn't last long. But yeah, I just leave it David Hufflepuff. That should tell people enough about me.
it
Like,
does. It's actually really good. I kind of like knowing people's Harry Potter houses when I first get to meet them, just so I could be like, okay, can we be friends? I can weirdly be friends with Slytherins, but actually, Gryffindors, they can be a little much for me sometimes. I love you guys, but a little much for, introvert Ravenclaw over here.
yeah, my twins, like I did the Pottermore test for all of them, so I had them all answer the questions, and my twins both got Gryffindor, but my oldest he got Slytherin, which not shocking,
Yeah.
but it was definitely, and that was definitely a hit to his like confidence at one
Oh
point.
no,
we had
Slytherins are awesome.
we had to have that conversation. And in the book and the movies, yes, the Slytherins are like the quote unquote bad guys for a little bit, but it's not all Slytherins. It's they have they want to go about life in a different way, but it's still good. It's not a problem.
Yeah, my husband actually tested as a Gryffindor, and I kind of think he made those answers happen because I'm looking at him sometimes. I'm just like, you are a reluctant Ravenclaw, darling. But if you want to go Slither, or if you want to go Gryffindor, you go ahead, honey.
Well, how did you get into Harry Potter? What's the story behind that?
I found the second book had just come out my sophomore year of high school. And I remember seeing them on sale at Barnes & Noble. And I was like, well, yeah, I need a good book to read. Let me pick up the first and second one. Because I think at that point they were $6.99 each. And I remember buying them and reading the first one just all in one day. I was so in love with this story. And then I read the second one and I knew that the second one had just come out. And I looked online at that point, we were all using AOL and we had dial up. And I remember going online and looking to see how far apart the books came out. And once I saw that it was at least a year, I realized I had to make the second one last a little longer. And I did. But I mean, if anyone knows Harry Potter, the second book isn't the best in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But the third book, when the third book came out, that was my absolute favorite. And that was the one that really pushed me into, that's it. I love Harry Potter more than anything else in the world. No book has made me cry as much as The Prisoner of Azkaban, aside from Gone with the Wind. I mean, that's huge. Like, I've read Gone with the Wind and I was crying during maybe the last few hours I was reading that book. Prisoner of Azkaban, I was crying for days. I was crying. Like, I was so happy. Oh my gosh, he has an uncle now. And then I feel weird spoiling things, even though they've been out for so many years.
It's okay. The people that listen know it's okay. There's no need to hold back.
All right. And then when Sirius died, that was like no book series had ever made me cry like just this whole thing. And then I went back after reading which one was it? Was it it wasn't Chamber of Secrets that Sirius died. It was
No, it's Order of the Phoenix.
Order of the Phoenix. I went back after that and I reread 1 and 2 and I could read them pretty quickly. And then just so I could get to 3 and get happy again. Because I was just 3 was just my favorite. It was absolutely, I thought I was crying during 3, but I realized it was, no, that's when he meets Sirius. And then I cried. A lot in Order of the Phoenix.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about them. I came back from college. I was a junior in college and I had a friend getting married back at my hometown. And so I drove back feeling like really crappy, like garbage sick. Found out I had pneumonia and my lungs were like filled with fluid and I couldn't go to the wedding.
Oh,
But
no.
so recovered. It took me a couple days to recover. And then my mom was like, here, have these books that I read. I really like them. I think you'll like them. It's the first 3. So I took them back
Nice.
and I got into it. And we were talking before we started recording about how like we're not really like super fans of stuff anymore. We're just chill or whatnot. And I joined like Harry Potter message boards and Harry Potter, like I joined everything under the sun. Harry Potter, like answer these questions and a group of people will tell you which house you are, like all sorts of ridiculous stuff. And I remember waiting for like Goblet of Fire to come out and buying it like the first day and so excited. And I can't remember which book it was. I remember Amazon was like, we guarantee that if you order this Harry Potter book with us, you will get it on the day it releases, guaranteed.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one that was, but I remember like them guaranteeing that you will have it on the day of release, no questions asked. Like, and I remember seeing pictures of just like the UPS or post office truck mail. United States Post Office trucks like filled with, because they came in a special box to let you know like that was the Harry Potter book coming.
Oh, yeah. I think they did something similar with that for the last book because I remember getting that. And at the time, I was married to my first husband and he had National Guard drill that weekend. And he was so mad because we were going to share a book. But that meant that I got to read it first. So I opened it up And I made sure, because I knew as soon as he got back from National Guard on Sunday, I think the book came to our house on Friday. I was like, I
Mhm.
know as soon as he comes back Sunday, he's going to grab that book. So I need to finish it really quickly. So I had to rush through the last book. And I mean, if anybody has seen the meme from Big Bang Theory of Penny after she's played like hours and hours of video games and she's an absolute mess, that was me at the end of that weekend. I'd stayed up as late as I could. And the thing was, I remember reading with there was a taboo on Voldemort's name, so you couldn't say it or else Death Eaters would appear in the book. And I remember reading that, and it was really late at night. And I got to the point where I was even so afraid to read the name or think it, because I was like, oh my God, the Death Eater's going to come get me. Like, this is how sleep deprived I was, because I wanted to read this damn book so badly.
Oh my gosh, that is awesome. I love that story so much. Yeah, the books I could like probably now I could burn through the first 3 relatively quickly, and then it'll take me maybe a day or 2 days to get through them if I really wanted to sit down and read them, and the kids don't have any activities at all and leave me alone and don't want food and me to
Yeah, kids
watch
just
stuff.
need to eat all the time.
Oh my god, it gets worse as they get older too. I
Oh,
mean,
no.
just constant like, hey, and my son, the oldest son, he's on the spectrum,
Mhm.
so he's very much like at bedtime. What's for breakfast tomorrow? I don't
Oh.
know. I'm not that far ahead. Or the first thing he'll ask when he sees me is, "What's for breakfast?" or "What's for lunch?" You just finished breakfast. What? Why are you thinking about lunch? Like, can't you think about something else? But yeah, Harry Potter, man, I love those books, and I got to know which is your favorite.
Yeah, it has to be number 3. Number 3 is my favorite book and movie. I think the movie was just gorgeous, and I was really worried about seeing the movie because I loved the book so much.
Hmm.
But I actually think it's my favorite movie too, especially with all the clocks in it and all the cinematography around the clocks. I just, as soon as I saw it in theater and in the theater, and we were going through sort of when you're watching it and you go through that sort of clock sequence in the beginning, I was
Hmm.
like, oh, that's it. I'm strapped in. I am ready. Like, let's do this.
Yeah, I really like 3. I like 3 for a number of reasons. The book and the movie. I really like just how the characters you've gone away from like the Christopher Columbus type like family-ish movie, because Prisoner of Azkaban is
Yeah.
that it's that book where I feel that things just changed for the series in general. Like it's a little bit darker. Sure, like Voldemort's not in it, but you still have like this dark stuff going on, but you're learning a lot about Harry's past and his family, and you get these like really great characters that are just like so wonderful between like Sirius and Lupin, and you get like this, oh my gosh, Scabbers has been a person this whole time.
Right. Yeah, that was just, I mean, that's when you start realizing just how in depth J.K. Rowling's mind is, and just how, wow, she actually has this whole thing planned out, mapped out in her head, ready to go. And we're just sitting there waiting, just waiting for her to just spill it all. And it's funny now that we're just like, oh, we don't listen to anything she says anymore. Because it's like the books are done. Like for me, I had that closure. Everything got tied up in a nice little loop. Like, okay, Dumbledore's gay. That's awesome. That's cool. That wasn't in the book because it wasn't relevant. So you find out little things like that. But then when she gets really in depth of just like, oh, I can't even think of anything now, but it's something that people get mad about, and I'm just like, well, it doesn't have anything to it doesn't have anything to do with the storyline that I love, so let
Meh.
them have it.
Exactly.
I will say, what was your least favorite book, if you have a least favorite book?
My least favorite book and movie is Chamber of Secrets. It's
Okay.
that's the second one. It's
Yeah.
I love, and it's interesting because as I've watched the movies repeatedly with my kids, not that that's a bad thing, but sometimes it gets to be too much. Chamber of Secrets has grown on me just for like Kenneth Branagh as Gilderoy Lockhart,
Yeah.
but it's still not my favorite, and I hate the movie portrayal of Ginny Weasley. I feel that like they did a
Really?
disservice to her character, and that she's so much she's a better character in the books than in the movie.
That's true, yeah.
But Yeah, that one's the one that I'm like, like really. I love like Order of the Phoenix as far as a movie. I love Prisoner of Azkaban. I just I was talking to one of my friends about this when we did a Harry Potter anniversary episode, and my dream is Netflix or HBO or Hulu or somebody somehow gets the rights to like turn it into a 10 or 13 episode series. Like each book becomes its own like 10 or 13 episode series. I would love that because then
Oh,
they
yeah,
could
that'd be
just
cool.
expand so much on the books.
Yeah, we were talking before the show how your kids are reading the books now and then they're watching the movie and asking you why they took out certain parts. And it is kind of sad when you read a book and then you watch the movie after. And, you know, I try not to be the person who's just like, oh, I thought the book was better.
The book was better.
The book was better. You know, I feel bad saying that sometimes. I will say, though, in Order of the Phoenix, I am not a fan of Harry. Harry is not my favorite person in that because he's so brooding and so he's the perfect epitome of an angsty teenager.
Mm-hmm.
But because I'm so invested in the storyline, I'm like, oh my gosh, Harry, shut up. Stop whining. Get to the damn story. Come on. He's just like, I'm just so angry. It's like, get over it. Like, you know, and I feel terrible because I'm like, your parents died. Get over it. But I'm like, I want to know what's going on with Hagrid. Go see Hagrid right now.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Who is your favorite character?
I love Hermione. I absolutely love Hermione. And I love Fred and oh my gosh, I guess I don't love
Fred and George?
George. Oh my gosh, I kept wanting to say Fred and Ginger, and I'm like, no, it's not Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Like, come on, brain, get out of that.
Come on, brain, start braining today.
It's making these weird connections today. No, Fred and George, they were so perfect as a little bit of comedy, especially in the dark. I just remember specifically laughing out loud at a part in the book where something serious was happening. They were in the Gryffindor tower and a sentence just popped in and all of a sudden Neville turned into a canary. And I just remember laughing hysterically because he had eaten something that the twins had given them, like some sort of changing pills or changing candies or something. And so serious. And oh my gosh, Voldemort's going to come and kill the whole school. What? All of a sudden Neville turned into a canary and he's over here, you know, chirping away. And I just remember laughing so hard and saying, thank God we have Fred and George. And I was also okay with killing off one of them because when J.K. Rowling talked about it, she was like, all right, Molly, the Weasleys have a lot of kids. You know, with the statistics of being in a battle, at least one of them has to go. And it was okay getting rid of a twin because there was another one. She said something like
That's
that.
so
And I was like,
harsh.
I can kind of follow that logic. I get that.
And they couldn't kill Percy because, you know, Percy is Percy. So
Oh, Percy.
yeah.
Yeah, he's not my. No. I kind of love Rita Skeeter too. She's hateable, but I like the idea of her character. It's a really interesting sort of. I mean, probably you know from your journalism background, but journalists aren't always portrayed in the greatest ways, and I've kind of come to terms with that. So I like seeing how people portray journalists in movies and TV shows and books, and I'm like, all right, that's your opinion. Oh, the other one, I don't love this character, but it's a fantastic character to look at. Is Umbridge, because she's weirdly more evil than Voldemort.
I was just going to ask you that question
Oh,
after
yeah.
you finished. Yep. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, this is a funny story. A library near us did a Harry Potter themed weekend once, and I was part of an acting troupe, and we were asked to portray some of the characters, and I got to play Umbridge because I have that sort of round face, and I was able to curl my hair and bought all pink and walk around and like intimidate. Like I had this little clipboard, I made my heels clack, and I would intimidate the students, and I would do a terrible British accent, by the way. It was so bad. But I got to play Umbridge, and it was such a fun thing to do because the kids also, they knew that there was a Dementor that came. It was a whole sort of play type thing that went on. The kids went to different activities. They got to pick out their wands. They got to train dragons. You know, this is all a really cool library program. And at the end, they kind of all gathered in what was known as the Grand Hall, and we decorated it like the Grand Hall. There were banners and everything. And I'm on stage with all the other teachers, and a Dementor comes in. And so the way that we wanted to make sure that the kids weren't scared by this Dementor in kind of, I think we used kind of the Scream costume to do that, you know?
Okay. Yep.
And then, you know, have a dark hood over and you couldn't see what was going on. So as Umbridge, I kept having to say, oh, there are no Dementors. We don't have to worry about Dementors. And then at the end, so this Dementor comes in, and I had to give this blood-curdling but also comedic scream that a lot of the kids laughed at. As soon as they saw that Umbridge was chased by a Dementor, it's so nice whenever I can make kids laugh. So I got to do that scream and run away. So Umbridge she kind of has a special place in my heart. Also, she's into cats, and I think that would be my third fandom, is like how ridiculously into my cats I am.
Oh, you're a cat lady.
I am a cat lady, and I've stopped trying to hide it too. And I show people my phone and pictures on my phone. I'm like, oh, let me find you a picture of my kids. Meanwhile, I'm scrolling through 20 like pictures of my cats because there are so many of them. And then my kids, I'm just like, whatever. Like I see them all the time and they're growing. All right, let's take a picture of you today. All right, good. That's all No, but my cat, oh, now he's in the sun. Now his eyes are closed. Now his eyes are open. Look, he's eating his food. Oh my goodness, his whiskers are so white today. Like I get ridiculous with them. And they all have crazy names. Like my tabby is Little Man, and he's 20 something pounds. He is not little. He was named as a kitten when he was little. And then Princess has evolved. I don't know if anybody has pets and you say their names over again, they start to evolve. So she was originally Princess, then she went to Princess Purry Pants. Now, after about 10 years, she's Princess Penelope von Purry Pants of the Purry Pants Kingdom. That is her full name.
That is an epic name.
See, you're very quiet now. You're just like, oh no, I've opened a can of cats.
I've opened. I have friends that are, they are self-admitted, cat people. They love their cats, and I love cats too. I grew up with a number of animals. At the highest, I think we had 4 cats. But then I found out I'm really allergic to them, and
Me too, and I don't care.
Oh man, I can't survive. Like I just my hands start swelling up, and like it's not good. Like,
oh, that's really allergic. Oh
yeah,
no.
Any animal that has hair or dander or any of that, like off limits, no go.
Oh, totally understandable.
Yeah, our kids are begging for a dog, and we're like, yeah, that's not, number one, you guys don't keep your rooms clean enough, and number two, yeah, there'd be allergy stuff.
Yeah, for me, I have the allergies, and I'm happy to take an allergy pill every single day.
Yep.
But my allergies aren't terrible, so there are days that I can skip it. But I do get it when they're really in my face and just all over me. I do get it where, oh, my eyes are watery and my nose is runny, and I'm still sitting there with just this puffy face being like, I don't care. They're in my lap. They love me.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, you stick, and I like that when we were talking about, like, you're like, you stick to the Harry Potter like closed canon, because when Pottermore came out, it was like, okay, Pottermore's out, and now it's like Pottermore, where you can find out like extra things about everybody and backgrounds and detailed information. You're like, this is a lot more. Like, I like that the books were so contained, and you got that like good snippet of stuff. I don't want any more sometimes.
That's a good way to put it, that they're very contained, and I liked that about it. And it's even funny, I haven't seen The Cursed Child. I haven't watched any of the Eddie Redmayne movies.
Fantastic Beast, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't watched any of those. I haven't read any of the accompanying books like Fantastic Beasts or anything. It's like, nope, just those 1 through 7 and then the movies. And if it's not Daniel Radcliffe, I'm probably not going to want to watch it, who, by the way, is so awesome. He just, as a person and as an actor, he's so fun. So I'm glad that he is kind of the face of Harry Potter at this point.
Yes, it is a good face to have. I think all of them have really, like, especially like the kid actors and like just seeing them evolve and grow and become like they're still like the faces of the series more
Yeah.
so than I don't want to be like, oh, they eclipse J.K. Rowling, but I think that she at certain times she's like doing things just to do things sometimes instead of just I don't know like and I don't want to be like down with J.K. Rowling, but like I don't know. It's a very like tightrope balancing act of like I love what you've done, but it just I think it's more like she's gone the George Lucas level of maybe you shouldn't stop touch your stuff anymore. Like leave it alone.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you're doing a painting and you get to a point where you're like, okay, that looks great. But because you're staring at it so often, you're like, oh, what if I just do a little bit more here? What if I do a little bit more here? And then by the end of it, the whole painting is just black because you've just added and added and added and added to it. Not to say that she's doing that, but I also feel like it would be hard to do anything else for her. I'm
Hmm.
sure she's tried other things, but because she's so acquainted, because people love Harry Potter so much, she's like, all right, I guess this is my niche. Okay, you guys want this? Here you go. Here's all the crazy just coming right at you.
Here's all the things that you didn't know you wanted to know, and maybe still don't, but here it
Yeah.
is. Now, Emily, not only did you work at the WWF Magazine, and not only are you a fan of Harry Potter, but you have a podcast called The Story Behind. And I gotta know how did you? Because you said that Story Behind wasn't your first podcast, but how did you get interested or into podcasting?
I had listened to podcasts for so many years. I actually found podcasts when I was going through a divorce and I moved to an apartment and we didn't have a TV, or I didn't have a TV. And I had my smartphone and this purple app had just started showing up. This was around 2012. So I had this purple app called Podcasts on my phone and I clicked on it because I had nothing else to unpack to. I mean, imagine unpacking boxes in silence, especially after divorce. And I'm just like, my head was not in a good space. So I was like, I just need some sort of noise. I'll put on a podcast. I need it to be about anything that won't trigger, because that was the other thing. I was worried about listening to music and having any sort of songs or music trigger something for me where I'm just going through a box of stuff and I'm just, oh my God, this
Mm-hmm.
song. So I found podcasts. I found the first podcast I found was Good Job Brain. The second one I found was the Story Song podcast. And they were trivia. Good Job Brain was all random trivia, history, fun pop culture things. They would ask each other questions from Trivial Pursuit cards in the beginning of the episodes. And then the Story Song podcast goes through a story song, and they were comedians. And they would kind of go through the lyrics and make jokes about it. And then at the end, they would go through how the song was written, how it performed, what the story behind that song is. And they just became my best friends during that divorce. It sounds so funny, but anybody who listens to podcasts knows that you feel like there's this very intimate connection with a podcast host that you listen to in your ears all the time. And they kind of brought me out of a little bit of a depression, and they kept me going. And I loved podcasts so much, so that when I started dating my husband now, he was like, we could make one. I have the equipment. And I was like, no, I have nothing to talk about. And this was maybe, 4 or 5 years later. And he's like, no, you really should. You're listening to podcasts all the time. You're talking about them. You don't really have a hobby, because I didn't. My hobby was like, raising my kid at the time, and, hanging out with my friends and talking about things. And he's like, you should make a podcast. You should think about it. And finally, when I had the idea for a podcast, I talked with one of my friends and I was like, Mark has the equipment. Like, we could do this. We could so do this. And I remember Googling how to start a podcast and getting to certain terms and being like, oh my gosh, this sounds too hard. I don't know what an RSS feed is, and I cannot figure out this word in the context of all the other words around it like I usually can. When you see a word you don't know and you're like, well, I could kind of make an educated guess, but something with RSS feed was like, huh? So I remember sitting there reading this and being like, okay, do I really want to do this? If I really want to do this, if I really want to commit, I'll do another Google search for what an RSS feed is. So here's the turning point. And I remember searching what an RSS feed was and kind of getting a working idea of it. It's still hard for me to tell people what an RSS feed is, but I'm just like now I know. But at the time, I'm like, okay, I have a working knowledge of it. Just tell me what I need to do to put out a podcast. We put out our first podcast. We recorded it on Rock Band mics. So the equipment that my husband said we had for podcasting, we did not. We had Rock Band mics, and we recorded that way. It took 8 hours to edit that first podcast, and I thought it was brilliant. I have never spent that much time editing something and being so proud of it at the end. And I'm sure that's how J.K. Rowling was, actually. She spent so much time writing the books, and now it's like, oh, but now that I've already podcasted for 3.5 years, I want to go back to that first podcast and fix things and, take out all the things that I thought were good at the time, but now maybe not so much. But yeah, that's pretty much how I started. And I got so into it. And you know what? The community, this was the first hobby or anything that I got into that I found this community where all of a sudden I felt like, oh, these are my people. These are my other Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs.
It's definitely something where, and I will say, some of the community members aren't the greatest. Like you find your people essentially.
Yeah.
And I definitely lean on some of my fellow podcast hosts a lot more than others, but I'm like, you guys get me. Like, let me ask you questions. Or man, there for a while I'd been really down about podcasting. I was like, I don't know, like I got to get myself out of the funk. I just can't do it anymore. And I talked to other people that felt the same way, and they're just like, take a break and come back to it at some point. It's definitely, you find this great group of people, and they're a really great group of people that if you find the right places to go, you're surrounded by good people.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is there are pockets of podcasting where you realize early on, oh, I don't think I belong here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's nice. You can step away. It doesn't bleed into many of the other amazing podcasting communities that you find. And then when you find those communities, it's like, oh, these are my friends. These are people I love. And then when I go to conferences, so I've talked how I'm an introvert, but it's weird when you see me at a podcasting conference, people are like, wait, no, you're not an introvert. I'm like, no, that's because I'm around my people. Like, you people don't drown me because you understand. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But if I go to a party at one of my friends' house that, say, I've been friends with since high school, and I go to a party there, that's when you see the introvert me, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, all I know how to talk about right now is podcasting, marketing your podcast, cats. And they're just like, so how do you feel about the political climate and and I'm like, no, these are heavy topics. I'm gonna, and then I eat my feelings. I eat all like, oh my god, I'm gonna eat until someone starts talking about podcasting, and then I'll have something to say. But when I go to a podcasting conference, it's like, oh my gosh, I love everybody. I could start a conversation. You could start a conversation with anybody, and you just say, hey, tell me about your podcast. And it's not awkward. And it's not like, what's a podcast? Oh my gosh, I have to explain to somebody else what a podcast is. And I never explain it right. I feel like I explain it in a way that they'll understand, but it's not necessarily the technically correct definition. I'll be like, it's like Netflix for radio. And I'm like, that is not the definition that you should be using, but it's what they'll understand. So it's always kind of awkward. But yeah, the community is the best. It's the only place I don't feel like an awkward introvert.
Well, how did the story behind come about? I didn't want to be like, tell me the story behind about the story behind. I didn't want to do that, but
a lot of people do that, and it's so funny because once I came up with the name of the podcast, I was like, I'm going to be asked what the story behind is, and I kind of came to terms with that. Like, that's the thing that people are going to ask, and it's very cute, and so I'd be used to it. So the story behind came. I was pregnant with my son a little over 2 years ago, and I got a craving for pink lemonade. And I walked to the store. At this time I was working and I was on my lunch break, and I walked to the store next door and I got pink lemonade and I brought it back to my desk and I looked at it and I was like, why, they have a picture of a pink lemon. They don't make pink lemons, do they? And it was pink lemonade in a way that didn't say it was raspberry or strawberry flavored. It was just pink lemonade.
Is the flavor pink?
Yeah, it's the flavor pink. And I was like, where's pink lemonade come from? And so I was on my lunch break and I Googled it. And there are two stories behind it. And one is that both happened at a circus and they were selling lemonade. And in one story, somebody had dropped a bunch of red candies into a vat of lemonade and turned the lemonade pink. And people liked the fact that it was pink. Okay, cool. And then the next story was that a circus performer, was washing their either pink or red tights in a trough of water. And then the people making lemonade, not paying attention to this, ran out of water for their lemonade, and they went and they used that water, not knowing, to make a new batch of lemonade. So then when they saw it, they were like, oh man, it's pink from this performer washing their tights in it. And I remember sitting there and reading these stories and looking around being like, oh my gosh, all my coworkers are on their lunch breaks. I have nobody to tell. I'm so sad. And then it hit me. My old podcast had ended. And I had podcaster friends that I had made being like, when are you getting back behind the mic? When are you making a new podcast? And I had texted Nick from Epic Film Guys. And I was like, I think I have an idea. What do you think of this? And I just talk about the story behind random objects, and it's just me, and it's just everyday objects, really short, really quick. And at the time I thought it would be something like 20 minutes. And then when I wrote the first script, I was like, yeah, this has to be 20 minutes. And I read it. It was 8. I'm like, oh my, who's going to listen to an 8-minute podcast? And so then I started putting them out being like, well, this is all I have. And, I don't really know many podcasts that are that quick, but maybe it'll catch on. And it ended up, I end up hearing from people who don't listen to it as soon as they come out. They actually save them up for a few weeks and then binge listen. And that's kind of how I hear from my listeners. And that's when I see the weird spikes. I'm just like, oh, somebody was binge listening today. Okay.
So you've been doing the story behind. I have to know, do you have like that episode where people are like, your go-to episode? Somebody says, tell me your favorite episode. Which is your favorite episode?
My favorite episode is episode 100. It's the story behind the musical, and I sing the whole thing. I sing the history of musicals. I put it to music. I put it to Modern Major General from the musical Pirates of Penzance. And it's just my favorite episode. I had the idea for it. I knew I was coming up on episode 100 and I wanted to do something big. I was like, I talk about musicals all the time. I love musicals. That might be another fandom of mine, is musicals. I might as well do an episode on that. And when I was writing it out, my husband was watching me and he's like, are you writing a song? And I'm like, yeah, you got to be quiet because I have to find something that rhymes with intellectual. And he's like, whoa, I have to find something that rhymes with musical. But it's just my favorite episode. I had so much fun with it. And actually, the week that I recorded it and put it out was the week that I was finding out. It was the week I found out that I was getting laid off from my full-time job. And so I was sitting at my desk and I was practicing this song in my head while I was working. And I got called in to my boss's office and she's like, close the door. And I was like, oh, this can't be good. Meanwhile, the whole time I'm thinking like, I really just want to go back and practice my song so I could perform it on my episode. And she's telling me, she's like, okay, so there's going to be layoffs. And in my head, I'm just like, this is a story all about the Modern Major Musical. And then like, she's telling me this, she's telling me you're going to get laid off. And I'm just like, and I have to record it and then I have to edit it. And then I have to, so like, there's probably a good reason I was on the chopping block. So that's just my favorite episode. I loved it so much. I'm trying to think of other episodes. The other thing is a lot of episodes, they kind of run together because many of the stories, they're all so interesting. And I try not to pick topics that are like, white guy invented this and he got rich. Most of the story behinds, if not all of them, are just, they're either interesting invention stories or it's interesting how the products were marketed. That's one of my favorite things to talk about is the marketing of them. I didn't realize how into marketing I would be until I was reading about other marketing techniques. So like with Dr. Pepper, the guy who was in charge of the Dr. Pepper plant, he made it a point to tell 6 or 7 people every single day the made up origin story about Dr. Pepper. And that's how it got spread all over, I think, this area in Virginia. So I always thought that was really cool.
For your podcast, like, is it like, I just, you're walking around and you're like, huh, I wonder what's that story like, because it's something now, especially with the advent of smartphones where you can actually look things up.
Mm-hmm.
Back in our college days of, well, we need to settle this debate, so we got to figure it out. It's going to take a while on dial up.
Go to the library.
Or yeah, we got to go to a library. Now it's like I can figure it out really quick. Like when you're walking around, are you like constantly like Googling different things that you come across just to see if they would make a good story?
Yeah. And actually, when we got Google Homes for our house, we have them all over the house. I'm constantly asking, because Google is a little bit more, I mean, with Alexa, you can't really ask what the history is of something, but with Google, you can. So I'm really glad we kind of have a whole Google house, and I can just, activate Google and say, hey, what's the history of this? And actually, that's how I come up with a lot of episodes, is something will pop into my head and I'll ask about the history, and I'll kind of hear the main gist. And if it's interesting enough, I'll make a note of it to do an episode about it in the future.
That's awesome.
I know. Thank you, technology. You make my life so much easier.
You make settling things so much easier. Like I no longer have to have a debate with people. I can just find my answer.
I know. And also, I've seen people get very, very passionate about what they perceive as the history of things. So I kind of have that same fact-checking mentality with WWE, where it's like, I cannot mess this up. I remember doing the story behind podcasts and podcasting and sending that episode, the script, to Daniel J. Lewis, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. Daniel J. Lewis is from the Audacity to Podcast, and Rob Walsh from Libsyn, who hosts my podcast. And I was like, I need you to look through this, because I don't want to put out anything that's going to tarnish the reputation of podcasting, or it's something that's not right that keeps getting repeated. And I remember hearing back from them being like, okay, that was the episode I was the most nervous about getting wrong, because it's something that I was so passionate about. Like, you cannot mess up the history of podcasting, because then you're going to hear, no, Adam Curry is the podfather. How dare you? It did not start with cereal.
Did when you got started with podcasting, or now that you're into it, so to speak, like what's your favorite thing about podcasting in general? Because there's, for people that don't know, there's a lot that goes into it, more than just, you hitting the podcast button and listening or recording or whatever. Yeah, there you go. What do you like most about podcasting?
I love the community. That's got to be it. I have never felt so loved across the internet, which is so funny to think about. So maybe 20 years ago, when I was reading those Harry Potter books and looking for people to talk about, it was like you'd go into forums, or at the time chat rooms, and talk about Harry Potter, and you'd find these people that you're really interested in, but because the internet was so new, you couldn't go meet them. It felt weird. I met maybe one person from the internet once who lived in New York, and I live in Connecticut, and I remember my parents had a fit. They were just like, you're meeting someone out there. I'm like, he's 17 and I'm 16. Like, this isn't, I'm pretty sure I've vetted this person well enough to know that they're real. But I remember my parents freaking out. Meanwhile, my best friends right now, aside from my husband, are on the internet, and they're people I see maybe 2 or 3 times a year at the most. But when I do, it's like, we're catching up. We know we actually don't need to catch up, because we're on the internet, so we know what's going on in each other's lives. And that's why I love it. I absolutely just love the community, and I love the people, and I love how passionate other podcasters are about podcasting, at least the ones that I kind of associate myself with, where it's like, I don't find people who are like, oh, podcasting, it's so stupid, but I have to do it for my business. I'm like, no, I don't really want to work with you, because I also work as an editor and consultant. And so I gauge that with people that I want to work with is, are you going to take podcasting as seriously as I need you to take it, so that I can work with you and not, hate working for you because you're making fun of podcasting. Like, there was a podcast, it was based on a diet that I was doing, and they had just the women who started this diet that I had been on for about 6 months, they were like, "We're going to start a podcast." And I was like, "Oh my God, I love podcasts. Thank God they're starting a podcast." They came on and they started making fun of podcasting in general. They're like, "We hate the term podcasting, so we're going to call this the potty because we hate it. And we're going to talk about podcasting all the time." And I'm like, "No, talk about this diet that you have me on. That, first of all, I'm on a diet, so I'm not very happy because I'm hungry. And now you're making fun of podcasting. Like, how dare you?" And I like stopped that diet completely. I was like, "I'm never doing this diet again because they don't love podcasting." I was like, "I can't get behind these women."
It's definitely something, and you brought it up about like telling people about podcasts, and man, that is the one thing where I still try, and I'm like, well, you've got an app on your phone, and you can find people talking about pretty much anything. Like, do you like true crime? You can totally hear people talking about true crime. Or hey, you like Game of Thrones? There's tons of Game of Thrones people that are probably talking about the same things that you're talking about with your friends, and you can listen to it. But yeah, that is the one thing there. It's definitely a tough sell, number one, to get people into, if they have no clue about it, to get them to know about it. And then the second is, you got to have that elevator pitch of, well, what's your podcast about? Oh gosh, let me think for a second.
And one of the things I talk with clients about, and I tell them, I'm like, you can't just say your podcast is about something. You have to give people a benefit to why they're going to listen, because you see people come in and say, "Hey, my podcast is really funny. We're about everything and anything." And I'm like, "Okay, but that doesn't make me want to listen, because I don't want to listen to something. I don't want to listen to everything and anything. I want to listen to specific things where, what will I get out of it? Will I get tips out of it? Will I get a good conversation? Will I get entertainment? Will I get something controversial maybe that'll make me think?" And I have to tell people that, like, if you're telling people to listen to podcasts, you can't just say, "Hey, listen to mine because I'm on it and it's really funny." You have to get specific.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I see on Twitter or in some of the Facebook groups. And there'll be times where people are like, "Hey, I'm looking for a podcast about." And sure, it'd be easy enough for me to be like, "Oh, just listen to my podcast." No, they're not looking for my podcast right now. They're looking for this. And I know some of these podcasts that they'd probably really enjoy. So let me pull those and be like, "Hey, go listen to these podcasts because they're really good." And I don't need to mention my podcast at all because it's cool. They'll get to it at some point.
Well, there are a lot of cool things that podcasters can do to sort of market without marketing their podcast. So if somebody's on Twitter and they're asking for podcast recommendations, which this is a really weird trend I'm seeing with podcasters, is I think they have it programmed where if somebody is asking for podcast recommendations, they have it set where all of a sudden they'll go and then they'll say, "Hey, come listen to my show." What's cool is you can recommend other people, but as long as your profile picture says, "Hey, I have a podcast,"
Mm-hmm.
that's basically advertising enough. And the fact that you're not pushing your own podcast, at least to me, I think it looks better that you're helping other people in the industry. And that's something that I try to do. I really hate pushing my own podcast on people. If they're, "Hey, I'm looking for a history and trivia podcast," I'll probably recommend Your Brain on Facts or Good Job Brain or Footnoting History, above mine, because they'll see in the profile picture, they'll see, okay, the story behind that might be trivia based. Also, she knows a lot of other trivia and history podcasters. I bet her show is related to them.
Exactly. And I feel like in the podcasting community, you build like these really great relationships with other podcasters. And I'm like, man, I might not cover this, but I absolutely 100% know that this guy over here has talked about it specifically. Let me be, hey, listen to this person's podcast. They do a great job.
And the best part about that is then you start to get a reputation of, "Oh, David, he knows everybody." And that's a cool reputation to have.
David, he knows enough about people to give good podcast recommendations.
Exactly.
Now, not only so you got the podcast, and then lo and behold, there's a book.
Yeah.
You're like a triple threat of podcasting and podcast consulting, and now you're an author.
Yeah, that was unexpected. And it's really weird because I always wanted to be a writer since about seventh grade when my teacher was like, "You're a really good writer. You should think about going into writing." And it was just something I did. It wasn't something I necessarily looked to for a career. And that's also why I got into journalism. I had taken all the writing classes from being an English major. And then once once the literature classes came and they were assigning me books to read, I was like, oh, no, this isn't for me. And then I switched to journalism where it was, hey, we're going to write all the time. I'm like, that's my major. That's for me. So I always wanted to be a writer. And when I was writing scripts for the story behind, it wasn't occurring to me that these could be put together for a book until a publisher reached out and she was saying she had listened to the episodes. And because they were so short, she's like, they would make fantastic chapters if you wanted to put 50 together and make a book. And originally they were very vague and they were saying, well, you could just do episodes that you had already done. But I wanted to make sure that I got chapters in there for the people who had already listened to the podcast. And there are 20 chapters in there with subjects that I'm not going to do a podcast on or that I haven't done a podcast on, so that it wouldn't be like, hey, listeners, you've already listened to my stuff for free. Come buy a book of the same stuff. So I wanted to make sure that I had extra in it for them. And it was a really fun experience. And sometimes when it's up against deadline and I have an episode that's due out, I look over and I'm like, oh gosh, I have 20 quote unquote episodes in that book that I could just read and publish it. But I don't. I don't do that. But it's very tempting.
So you got the podcast and you got the book, and is there going to be like another book? Are you going to do even more, or are you going to go a different direction, or is it just going to be like, okay, I've done the book, now just do podcasting, continue the story behind for a little bit and build up more for a second book?
I don't know yet. And I've heard from other authors that writing a book is very much like childbirth. And it's still so fresh in my mind. and people have kids all the time. I understand that. But if you're a mom and you've gone through childbirth, you know the pain right after it's done. And you're just like, oh gosh, I don't understand how people can have more than one kid. And I remember feeling the same way after having my daughter. I'm like, that's it. Oh no, I'm never going through this again. And of course you forget. And I forgot after 6 years. And I went through it again and I was like, oh God, I remember it. It's all coming back to me right now. And it's terrible. We're already 9 months in. Like it's going to happen. But with the book, it was very similar where you're working so hard for 9 months, the buildup of it, the buildup and the marketing and the pre-marketing, and having to pre-sell my book before I had fully written it was so bizarre to me. I was like, well, I don't even know if it's good yet. I don't know how people are going to react to it. And I'm pushing them to buy something that, I have no idea how it's going to end up. So I don't know if I'll write another book, but I say that now with kind of an open question mark of there might be another book in the future. But one of the cool things about having the book was having media companies reach out to me. And so there are a few TV shows or TV companies that have looked at the book and that I'm in talks with, but nothing really official yet. So
okay,
I can't really go like, oh yeah, and it's going to be a TV show. I'm like, I don't know yet. We're in talks, whatever Hollywood in talks means.
Gotcha. Yes, like the in talks of, yeah, we really like it. 10 years later, the movie comes out or a TV show, and you're like, oh wow, that's what in talks is. Like,
I know, yeah. And then I'm totally going to pull a J.K. Rowling and be like, all right, by the way, the story behind the theremin, Dumbledore was gay. So, like, I don't know.
oh my gosh. So for people that are interested, and I want to just make mention, because you also have a huge presence on the internet, because that's where we all live nowadays. You have a really great presence on like Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and I really want to make sure that if people are interested in doing podcasts, or maybe you're doing a podcast now and you're looking for like advice or information, that you put out really great like Instagram stories and stuff on Twitter and on Facebook, and I'm subscribed to your newsletter that comes out.
Oh,
or
that
your
never
your
comes out. I'm so sorry. I have a newsletter. I hate doing it. But there is one.
but I got the thing about turning podcasts into books. So
Yeah, that's true. For the really big things, I suck it up and I put aside 3 hours and I'm like, oh, I have to do my newsletter and I hate it. But yeah, for the big things, they do go out.
But I want to say, like, you are an excellent resource, and you put stuff out there that I think some of it's common sense, but some of it's really just stuff that, you know, like you said at the beginning, like RSS. Like what is like the only thing I knew about RSS feeds was getting news stories like immediately
Yeah.
delivered way back in the day, and now it's not something that I even think of.
I know. That's how I knew it. I knew it from blogs that I would follow, and they would always have those little dot with the waveform buttons for the RSS feed. And the way I had it set up was I could just click on that, and then it would be in my reader every day. And then they
Yep.
got rid of the main reader. I think it was Google Reader. They got rid of that, and I was like, well, I guess I'm not following blogs anymore because I'm too lazy to find something new. My husband, he's like, Feedly, Emily. I'm like, nah, it's too much. I'm already invested in something else.
Yep, you've moved on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you provide a great resource for I feel like pretty much any level podcaster, from someone that's interested to, like, even when I'm looking at stuff, I'm like, man, Emily's really challenging me to think about some of the stuff that maybe I'm not doing with the podcast. Maybe I should be doing with the podcast, or I didn't know that. Let me make sure I remember to do that in the future.
I love Instagram just for that because it's such a quick, if I get an idea for something, I can make an Instagram story out of it. And at this point, Instagram's kind of like my hobby. It looks like it's part of my business, but really if I'm on Instagram, it's because I should be working. So, and I made the Instagram handle Emily Peck Prokop be all about podcasting. There's a little bit of family stuff in there, but really that's for me to find other podcasters to talk to. I found clients through that for podcast editing and consulting and stuff, but for the most part, it's talking to other podcasters and really helping to build that community, because there isn't as much of a podcasting community right now on Instagram because it's very hard because you only get the one link, and that's the link in your profile.
Yep.
So it's not like you could send people to a new episode. And you do a great thing. You do the link in the bio, and do you change it every week?
No, I leave it as the same link, and I just put link in bio, because they'll hopefully they'll inevitably click on it and it'll take them to where all the episodes are, and they'll see the most recent one on top.
Exactly. And that's kind of the only thing you can do on Instagram as far as linking to your episodes. But adding a visual component to them I found a lot of benefit. So I also have one for the story behind where I post little trivia facts from the show, and I get people who read those and they're like, oh, that's really interesting. I kind of want to learn more. And it's so cool to bring people back to the show that way. So Instagram's kind of my hobby, and I pretend it's marketing, but it's really the thing I do when I should be working.
Instagram for me was, when I first started, it was the easiest way to find people, because I see them wearing their costumes and I'm like, oh, they must like insert fandom here because they're spending a lot of money and time on making the costumes. Maybe they'll want to talk to me.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
So that was initially how I found, like, probably the first 20 or 30 people that I recorded with was people off Instagram. I had to learn how to use Instagram, and I learned that the messaging system on Instagram is not the greatest, but you work with what you got.
It's not the greatest, but that's another thing that I tell people is if you get people interested enough, they will DM you. And once they send you a DM, it's kind of like they're partially in your world. And you can also send people links through DMs. So
Yes.
that's a big pull for that. But it's just a matter of doing things intentionally, especially with social media. So when I'm on Instagram, most likely I'm not scrolling. I do late at night when I'm kind of done with all my work and I'm like, okay, finally I can scroll and look at other people's pictures. But if I'm on there, I'm trying just to be on there to put up my information, hang out for a little while if anybody wants to talk. And then I have to like close the app and put my phone on the other side of the room so I can actually get my work done, because it's so easy with social media for any podcaster when you're on social media to get swept up in, oh my gosh, but I want to answer all the questions and I want to talk to people. And it's like, no, you kind of have to put your stuff out, wait around to see if a conversation happens, start those conversations with people. But you can't just go scrolling and looking at all the other things that you want to do and be and say. And
Absolutely. Can't click on the hashtag cats of Instagram.
but that's what I do when I'm so sad. Is I click on that Instagram. And actually, after the 2016 election, that night I unsubscribed on Facebook from all the news outlets I was following, and I then followed a bunch of cat pages. Any page that I could find with cats, I started following it, and I loved my Facebook feed again. My Facebook feed was just my favorite place. I'd open it up and there'd just be cats everywhere. It was great. Everyone would be like, I'm so mad. I hate Facebook. I'm like, come look at mine. Look at this cat. Look at him. Look at him. Look, he's drinking like a human. And
Now, for the people that have made it to the end with us today, what are the best places to find you on the internet?
Yeah, most things you can find at thestorybehindpodcast.com. There's a link to Twitter, and my handle there is storybehindpod. That's really the only time I'm on Twitter. Twitter is kind of like a fire hose for me. I get too overwhelmed by it sometimes, so I'm not on as much as I want to be. Instagram is really where I am. Over there, I'm storybehindpod, or if you want to find out some podcasting tips and talk podcasting, you can follow me over there at Emily Peck Prokop.
Awesome. And I'll have the links to everything, including, I guess, everything. Yeah, everything. Twitter,
Yeah.
Facebook, Instagram, the website, a link to your book so that way people can buy it and have it on their bookshelf or in their Kindle, wherever
Yeah.
they want.
In the bathroom, I actually have had people say, hey, just so you know, I read your book in the bathroom. And then I show them the introduction that I wrote. And the last line of the introduction is, P.S., it's okay if you read this in the bathroom. Because I understand people love trivia books in the bathroom. And I was one of those. I always had the Uncle John's reader in there. So.
That was, for many a year, the bathroom was the only place I could read books to get away from certain small children.
Oh my gosh. The bathroom, I have weirdly decked out my bathroom because sometimes it is my little haven away from kids. And I'm just like, it's the only door in the house with a lock on it. So
Our kids still don't care. Like they'll come in and like, Mommy, Daddy, I have a question. I'm in the bathroom. Can't you just let me be in the bathroom for a few minutes? Like, hold your questions.
I know I would complain that it's just kids, but my husband does it too. I'm in the shower and he's like, hey, so I'm thinking about lunch. And I'm like, I will be out in 5 minutes. Give me my 5 minutes.
What a way to end the podcast today.
Yeah. I love my husband. That's
Let's talk about bathroom stories and trying to escape into them. Well, Emily, I just want to say it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. And I really appreciate all your awesome stories, because we totally went over like the normal time, which is awesome.
I know. I was so worried that
Oh,
I only
no.
had 2 kind of fandoms to talk about.
And yet here we are going, we've been talking for about 2 hours, and it'll cut down to an hour and a half based on, when I hit the recording button. But, it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.